The tension in Judge Judy's courtroom was electric. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett sat at the defendant's table, her shoulders straight, eyes focused ahead, despite the chaos erupting around her. Judge Judy Sheindlin, America's toughest TV judge, was leaning forward from her bench, her famous stern expression darker than usual. Congresswoman Crockett, Judge Judy's voice cut the air like a knife. I've been hearing about your grandstanding in Congress, and frankly, I think someone needs to teach you some respect for authority. The packed courtroom held its breath. This wasn't a normal case. This was a special episode featuring the controversial young Congresswoman, and Judge Judy was clearly ready for battle. What happened next would become the most watched moment in Judge Judy's 25-year career and turn Jasmine Crockett into an even bigger political superstar. Your Honor, Crockett began, her voice calm but carrying an edge that made everyone lean forward. With all due respect, I think you might want to check your facts before you come for me. The audience gasped. Nobody talks back to Judge Judy, ever. But Jasmine Crockett was about to do exactly that, and her response would leave the famous judge stunned for the first time in television history. If you're ready to see how Congresswoman Crockett handled America's toughest judge, stay with us. This is a story about power, respect, and the quiet force of truth. To understand this explosive confrontation, consider the two figures at its heart. Judge Judy Sheindlin, an 81-year-old icon, built her empire on no-nonsense authority and zero tolerance for foolishness. Her career from Brooklyn family court judge to TV sensation cemented her belief in unquestioning respect for authority and rules. She watched Jasmine Crockett's rise in Congress with growing irritation, seeing her bold questioning as disrespectful grandstanding. Jasmine Crockett, 42, a former civil rights attorney, represents a new guard. She earned her place in Congress by outworking and outsmarting, learning that respect is earned, not demanded. Her background fighting for the voiceless taught her to be calm under pressure, sharp with facts, and unintimidated by titles. This wasn't just a TV show, it was a clash of philosophies. Judy's old guard, respect authority first, versus Crockett's new generation, authority must earn respect through action. The outcome would signal whose approach America was ready to embrace. The entire audience knew they were about to witness something historic. Two of the strongest, smartest women in America were about to go head-to-head, and only one would walk away with their reputation intact. The confrontation began almost immediately when Judge Judy called the court to order for what was supposed to be a special episode discussing congressional ethics in public service. Congresswoman Crockett, Judge Judy began, consulting her notes with theatrical importance. I've been watching your performance in Congress, and I have to say, I'm not impressed. The audience shifted uncomfortably. This was already more personal than anyone had expected. You seem to think that being loud and confrontational makes you effective. But what I see is a young woman who doesn't understand how to show proper respect to her elders and betters. Crockett's expression didn't change, but those who knew her could see the slight tightening around her eyes. Judge Judy had just made her first mistake, questioning Crockett's intelligence and respect. Your Honor, Crockett replied evenly, I'd be happy to discuss my congressional record with you. I think you might be surprised by what I've actually accomplished. But Judge Judy wasn't interested in a discussion. She was here to deliver one of her famous verbal beatdowns. Don't Your Honor me in that tone, Judge Judy snapped, her voice rising. I've been practicing law since before you were born. I've seen hundreds of lawyers who think they're smarter than everyone else, and they all have one thing in common. They're usually wrong. The tension in the courtroom ratcheted up several notches. Judge Judy was clearly trying to establish dominance through age and experience. You want to talk about accomplishments? I've been on television for 25 years, making more money than most politicians could dream of, because I know how to handle people like you. Crockett leaned forward slightly, her voice remaining calm but gaining an edge. Your Honor, I'm not sure what you mean by people like me. Could you clarify that? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Judge Judy had walked into potentially problematic territory, and everyone in the courtroom could feel it. Judge Judy, perhaps realizing her mistake, pivoted to a different attack. What I mean is politicians who think they can come into established institutions and change everything without paying their dues. You've been in Congress for what, a few years, and you think you can lecture Supreme Court justices and federal judges? This was the moment Crockett had been waiting for. Judge Judy had just revealed that she fundamentally misunderstood what Crockett's role actually was. "Your Honor," Crockett said, her voice now carrying the authority she developed through years of courtroom practice, "I think there might be some confusion about how our constitutional system works." The audience could sense that something was shifting. Crockett wasn't backing down. She was positioning for a counterattack. Judge Judy, apparently thinking she was winning, decided to press harder. "Don't lecture me about the Constitution, young lady. I've been interpreting law longer than you've been alive. The problem with your generation is that you think you know everything, but you don't understand respect for institutions." She pointed directly at Crockett, her voice taking on the tone that made her famous. "You want to know what I think? I think you're a grandstander who uses inflammatory rhetoric to get attention. Real lawyers handle their business quietly and professionally." What Judge Judy didn't realize was that she had just walked into a perfectly laid trap. By questioning Crockett's legal credentials and suggesting she was unprofessional, Judge Judy had opened the door for Crockett to demonstrate exactly how prepared and professional she really was. Crockett sat back in her chair, a slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Those who had watched her dismantle opponents in congressional hearings recognized the expression immediately. "Your Honor," she said, pulling out a folder that her legal team had prepared, "since you question my legal credentials and my understanding of constitutional principles, I think this might be a good time to review some facts." Judge Judy raised an eyebrow, still confident in her position. "What facts could you possibly have that would be relevant here?" "Well," Crockett said, opening her folder with deliberate care, "let's start with something you said a moment ago about respecting institutions and handling business quietly." The courtroom was completely silent now. Everyone could feel that Crockett was building towards something significant. "You mentioned that you've been interpreting law for decades, which is true, but I think the audience might be interested in how you've actually handled some of your most famous cases." Judge Judy's confident expression flickered for just a moment. She wasn't used to being the one under scrutiny. Crockett pulled out a series of documents from her folder. "Your Honor, I've taken the liberty of reviewing some of your most publicized decisions from your time as a family court judge before your television career." This was unexpected. Nobody had ever brought Judge Judy's actual judicial record into question on her own show. "What are you doing?" Judge Judy demanded, but her voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. "I'm demonstrating the difference between television performance and actual legal analysis," Crockett replied calmly. "Since you've questioned my qualifications, I thought it might be helpful to examine yours." The audience was riveted. This had gone far beyond a typical Judge Judy episode. This was turning into a real legal confrontation between two accomplished attorneys. Crockett held up the first document. "This is from a 1987 case where you ruled against a single mother seeking child support. Your reasoning was that she should have made better choices rather than relying on the court system." Judge Judy's face was starting to flush. "That case was decided correctly based on the facts presented." "Perhaps," Crockett continued, "but here's what's interesting. 3 years later, the appellate court overturned your decision, noting that your reasoning showed insufficient consideration of the legal standards and inappropriate personal judgment." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Judge Judy was being fact-checked in real time, and she clearly hadn't expected it. What happened next marked the moment when the entire dynamic of the confrontation changed. Judge Judy, clearly rattled by having her judicial record questioned, made a critical error. "How dare you come into my courtroom and question my judicial record?" she shouted, standing up from her bench. "I don't care what some appellate court said years later. I know how to run a courtroom." But Crockett was just getting started. "Your Honor, this actually brings up an important point. This isn't really your courtroom, is it?" The question hung in the air like a bomb about to explode. "What did you say?" Judge Judy demanded. Crockett stood up, her full legal training now on display. "I said, this isn't really your courtroom. This is a television set. You're not actually a sitting judge anymore. You're a television personality who arbitrates disputes for entertainment purposes." The audience gasped. Someone had just explained to Judge Judy exactly what her show actually was, and she clearly didn't like it. The authority you're claiming to have over me as a congresswoman is imaginary. I'm an elected federal official. You're a retired judge who now works in television. Our roles in the actual legal and political system are quite different. Judge Judy's usual quick retort was absent. Her face was a mask of disbelief. Someone had systematically dismantled her authority while remaining completely professional and factual. The stage was now set for what would become the most memorable moment in either of their careers. What happened next would be replayed millions of times and studied in law schools as an example of how to handle authority figures who overstep their bounds. Crockett remained standing, her voice calm but carrying the authority she'd earned through years of constitutional law practice. Your Honor, since you brought up respect for institutions, let me explain how our constitutional system actually works. She opened her folder to another set of documents. As a member of Congress, I took an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. That oath requires me to provide oversight of the executive and judicial branches, including questioning Supreme Court justices about their ethics and conduct. Judge Judy tried to interrupt, but Crockett continued with the precision of a seasoned litigator. You called this grandstanding, but the Constitution specifically gives Congress the power and responsibility to investigate and oversee the other branches of government. It's called checks and balances, and it's fundamental to our democracy. Crockett pulled out a copy of the Constitution itself. Article 1, Section 1 gives Congress legislative power. Article 1, Section 8 gives Congress the power to regulate courts, including the Supreme Court. When I question judicial ethics, I'm not being disrespectful. I'm doing exactly what the founders intended. The audience was completely absorbed. This wasn't just a personal confrontation anymore. It was a real-time civics lesson from someone who clearly knew what she was talking about. Your Honor, you said that I don't understand respect for institutions, but respectfully, I think you might not understand what my institutional role actually requires. But Crockett wasn't finished. She pulled out another document that would prove to be the decisive moment. You mentioned that real lawyers handle their business quietly and professionally. That's an interesting perspective, but it's not supported by legal precedent. She held up a Supreme Court case. In McGrain versus Doherty, 1927, the Supreme Court held that Congress has not only the right, but the duty to investigate and expose wrongdoing in government. The court specifically said that Congress's oversight function is essential to inform lawmaking. Judge Judy was staring at Crockett with a mixture of shock and grudging respect. She clearly expected to intimidate a young politician, not receive a constitutional law lecture from an expert. So when I question Supreme Court justices about undisclosed gifts and ethical violations, I'm not grandstanding. I'm fulfilling my constitutional duty as defined by the Supreme Court itself. Crockett then turned to her own credentials, and her voice took on a more pointed edge. Your Honor, you questioned my legal qualifications earlier. Let me clarify something for you and the audience. She pulled out her resume. I graduated from the University of Houston Law Center. I spent over a decade as a civil rights attorney, winning cases in federal court that protected people's constitutional rights. I was elected to the Texas legislature, where I passed significant legislation. Then I was elected to Congress, where I serve on a House Judiciary Committee. The contrast with Judge Judy's television career was becoming stark. My qualifications to discuss constitutional law aren't based on television ratings or entertainment value. They're based on education, experience, and the trust of voters who sent me to Congress. With surgical precision, Crockett added, "You said I don't understand respect for institutions, Your Honor, but I think what you really mean is that you expect deference from authority figures, regardless of whether that authority is earned or appropriate." Crockett's voice remained respectful but firm. I have tremendous respect for legitimate institutional authority. I respect federal judges who follow ethics rules. I respect Supreme Court justices who demonstrate judicial temperament. I respect television personalities who stay in their lane. The implication was clear, and the audience understood it immediately. But respect for institutions doesn't mean blind obedience to people who claim authority they don't actually possess. Then Crockett delivered what would become the most quoted part of her response. You criticize my generation for thinking we know everything. But, Your Honor, we don't think we know everything. We think we know enough to ask the right questions of the right people at the right time. She gestured to the courtroom around them. You built your career on holding people accountable, on demanding that they answer for their actions. How is what I do in Congress any different? The parallel was devastating. Judge Judy has spent decades grilling people on television. But when someone applied the same scrutiny to institutions she respected, she called it disrespectful. The difference is that when I ask tough questions, it's to Supreme Court justices who have lifetime tenure and make decisions affecting millions of Americans. When you ask tough questions, it's to people fighting over security deposits and fender benders. Crockett sat down, but she wasn't finished. Your Honor, you said earlier that you've been making more money than most politicians could dream of. That's probably true, but money isn't how we measure success in public service. She leaned forward, her voice carrying the weight of genuine conviction. I could have stayed in private practice and made more money, but I chose public service because some things are more important than money. The courtroom was completely silent. Even Judge Judy seemed to recognize that something significant was happening. So when you question my qualifications or my methods, Your Honor, I want you to understand something. I'm not here for the money, the fame, or the television ratings. I'm here because the Constitution requires Congress to provide oversight, and I take that responsibility seriously. For perhaps the first time in her television career, Judge Judy was truly taken aback. She sat back in her chair, looking at Crockett with an expression that mixed surprise, respect, and perhaps even a hint of admiration. When she finally spoke, her voice had lost all its earlier aggression. Congresswoman, that was quite a response. The admission was barely audible. I think, Judge Judy continued slowly, I may have underestimated you. Crockett smiled slightly. Your Honor, that's been happening to me my whole career. I'm used to it. The courtroom erupted. The audience, many of whom had come expecting to see Jasmine Crockett get the traditional Judge Judy treatment, instead witnessed something unprecedented. They had just watched a constitutional lawyer systematically dismantling one of television's most formidable personalities while remaining completely professional and respectful. People were on their feet applauding, others were recording on their phones, knowing they'd witnessed something historic. This wasn't just good television. It was a master class in how to handle authority figures who overreach. Even Judge Judy's own staff looked impressed. They'd worked with her for years and had never seen anyone handle her quite like this. The immediate aftermath of Crockett's systematic dismantling of Judge Judy's authority was unlike anything television had ever seen. As the show wrapped, the atmosphere in the studio was electric. Judge Judy, clearly shaken, offered a rare concession. Congresswoman Crockett, she said during the closing credits, you've given me a lot to think about. I came into this thinking I knew who you were and what you represented. I was wrong. This acknowledgement was unprecedented. Crockett's response had been so thorough, professional, and well-researched that even Judge Judy had to concede. Behind the scenes, Judge Judy's producers were already discussing how to handle the episode, knowing they had television gold while also recognizing that their star had just been upstaged in spectacular fashion. Within minutes of filming wrapping, clips from the confrontation began spreading across social media. 30 Jasmine schools, Judy and constitutional burnout trended. Constitutional law professors and legal analysts praised Crockett's performance as a masterclass and required viewing. Legal Twitter exploded with commentary and memes. Law schools sought permission to use the confrontation as teaching material. Federal judges, speaking anonymously, appreciated Crockett's defense of congressional oversight. With one telling the Washington Post, she articulated the constitutional principles better than most lawyers I see in my courtroom. The confrontation had immediate political ramifications. Democratic leadership recognized Crockett as a star, inviting her to major Sunday talk shows as a constitutional expert. Even some Republicans grudgingly acknowledged her impressive knowledge of constitutional law. Beyond politics and law, the confrontation represented something larger in American culture. For decades, Judge Judy had represented unquestioned authority, the stern elder who could shut down any challenge with experience and force of personality. Crockett's response offered a new model, respectful but informed pushback against authority that overreaches legitimate bounds. She hadn't been disrespectful or confrontational. She'd simply been better prepared and more knowledgeable. Cultural commentators noted the generational and racial dynamics at play, as a young black woman had just out-argued one of America's most famous authority figures through superior knowledge and preparation. "This is what it looks like when the next generation of leaders shows up prepared," wrote one columnist. Crockett didn't just defend herself, she defended the constitutional principles that make accountability possible. In the weeks following the confrontation, both women saw their public profiles change significantly. For Crockett, she went from being known primarily as a fiery congressional questioner to being recognized as a serious constitutional scholar and political voice. Speaking requests poured in from universities, legal organizations, and political groups across the country. Her book deal, already in negotiation, became significantly more valuable as publishers recognized that she had demonstrated an ability to explain complex legal and political concepts in accessible ways while maintaining her principles under pressure. Most importantly, her congressional colleagues began treating her with a new level of respect, with committee chairs consulting her on constitutional questions and leadership, including her in high-level strategy discussions. For Judge Judy, the impact was more complex. While some criticized her for being outmatched, many respected her gracious acknowledgement of Crockett's expertise, and the confrontation actually enhanced her reputation in some circles, showing that she was secure enough to admit when she'd been wrong. However, the episode also highlighted the limitations of her television persona when confronted with real expertise, with some legal commentators noting that her courtroom authority worked well for small claims, disputes, but was less effective against someone with genuine constitutional knowledge. The confrontation taught several important lessons that resonated across American political and legal culture. Preparation beats intimidation. Crockett's success came from knowledge, not attitude. She'd done her homework and could back up every claim with constitutional presence and legal authority. Respect goes both ways. Crockett showed that you could challenge authority respectfully while still making your point decisively. She never raised her voice or became personal, but she was devastating in her factual responses. Constitutional knowledge matters. The episode highlighted how few public figures actually understand constitutional principles, making Crockett's expertise unassailable. The confrontation also demonstrated new models of leadership, showing what new generation leadership could look like: informed, principled, and unintimidated by traditional authority structures. Perhaps the most significant long-term impact was educational, as the episode became required viewing in constitutional law classes, political science courses, and leadership development programs. High school civics teachers use clips to explain separation of powers and congressional oversight. Law schools use it to show effective argumentation under pressure, and political science professors use it to demonstrate how institutional knowledge could be leveraged effectively. The episode also sparked broader conversations about civic education, with many commentators noting that Crockett's ability to explain constitutional principles clearly highlighted how poorly most Americans understood their own government. The success of Crockett's approach inspired other young politicians to adopt similar strategies, with more focusing on substantive knowledge and professional preparation rather than relying on viral moments or confrontational rhetoric. The episode also changed how established figures approached confrontations with new generation leaders, making clear that underestimating them came at your own risk. Political strategists began studying the encounter as a model for how to handle authority challenges, as Crockett had shown that you could be respectful and devastating simultaneously, professional and powerful at the same time. The confrontation also marked a shift in how political media covered congressional figures, with outlets paying more attention to substantive expertise and constitutional knowledge rather than focusing only on controversial statements or viral moments. Crockett's performance demonstrated that audiences were hungry for real information delivered by people who actually knew what they were talking about, proving that intelligence and preparation could be just as entertaining as conflict and controversy. In the end, the confrontation between Judge Judy and Jasmine Crockett established a new standard for public discourse, showing that respect for authority and holding authority accountable weren't mutually exclusive. Crockett had demonstrated that the most effective way to challenge overreach wasn't through disrespect or aggression, but through superior knowledge and unwavering professionalism. She had turned what was supposed to be her humiliation into a teaching moment for the entire country. The episode proved that in America, constitutional knowledge still mattered, preparation still counted, and truth still held power, especially when delivered by someone brave enough to stand up for it. What did you think of Jasmine Crockett's handling of Judge Judy? Did she strike the right balance between respect and accountability? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to smash that like button if you believe preparation beats intimidation, and subscribe because the next showdown is coming sooner than you think, and you won't want to miss it.